Next from Chicago, Senate President John Cullerton talks to a Union League Club audience about Illinois' fiscal future. Following his speech, Senator Cullerton talks to members of the press about Medicaid spending and the GOP gubernatorial race. This runs about 1 hour.
This is such a special place, and it is such a special room in such a special place, and it speaks to the club and its commitment to community and country, which is our motto. And you see that arrayed around you because prior members of the club really passed on a legacy of great art and a legacy of commitment. The club, 1879, this was not its first clubhouse. This came along in the 1920s, but the members of the 1920s wanted to recall the spirit of 1879. So on the mantle behind us, behind our friends, the reporters and camera people, there's a phrase that I think might imbue some of what the senator wants to talk about this morning, and it's one that guides us. Welcome to loyal hearts. We join ourselves to no party which does not carry the flag and keep step to the music of the Union. There's that artistic and poetic use of the term music. And we know in Chicago politics, sometimes the music gets very loud, and we know in Illinois government, sometimes the music is, shall we say, atonal, not to say sharp or flat, but the music always tells us something. That music, whether it's coming from Washington or from the 30th Ward or from Springfield, is the music of our Union. And that is why it is a real privilege to join with all of you in welcoming one of our top office holders in the state of Illinois. Ladies and gentlemen, a big welcome for Senate President John Cullerton.
Thank you very much, Chris. This is a beautiful room, a beautiful location, and a great club, and a distinguished audience. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you this morning. I'd like to do something that, in my opinion, too few leaders of our state are willing to do, and that is to tell you some of the good news about Illinois. Lately, we've been accused, or I've been accused actually, of being too optimistic about our state. And I'll admit there's a lot of work to be done to improve our economic climate. But you simply cannot ignore the progress that we've made the last 5 years. That continuing progress is why I'm very optimistic, and I believe you should be too. I think it's time to end the Illinois bashing and start recognizing our economic attributes and build on them to solve problems. Now, I was not aware that Mr. Whitley was going to be here today, the president of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce, but in my prepared remarks, I would like to compliment him and quote from him, because he recently authored a great piece entitled "Why Illinois?" and in it he offered up this assessment of our state. And I'm going to quote from Doug. "The key components for business success are present. There is an abundance of land, fresh water, highly educated and trained workers, competitively priced energy, state-of-the-art data capability, and extensive transportation networks to move people, raw material, goods and services, population density assures a substantial labor pool, a higher than average personal income for Illinois residents, and the appeal of an attractive destination city for visitors guarantees a robust and extensive consumer market. Illinois is home to quality educational and healthcare facilities, as well as renowned research institutions and national laboratories," close quote. He then goes on for 7 pages, making the case for why Illinois remains a national business leader blessed with advantages that should not be overlooked or dismissed. Those advantages: our state is the 5th most populated in the country, and this city anchors the 3rd largest metro area in the nation. We attract the best and the brightest because our businesses and institutions demand it, and that collection of people and personalities and intellects create a vividly diverse community that others can only envy. 31 of the largest publicly traded companies identified in Illinois. We are a transportation hub for the nation and world, boasting more interstates than any other state, the nation's largest rail hub, the most connected airports in the world with direct flights to almost 400 cities around the globe, and a digital highway that offers broadband service to more than 90% of Illinois households. Illinois is a leader in energy policy and production. We were among the first states to deregulate the electricity marketplace, a move that saved customers $37 billion over the past 16 years. We benefit from low electricity rates and a reliable industry that continue to add production capacity and export power to customers in other states. Those are among the reasons why Site Selection magazine recently named Chicago the top metro in America. In 2013, Chicagoland secured more corporate facility investment projects than any other metro area in the country. The 373 facility deals here far exceeded second place Houston's 255 projects. And the magazine put it, from digital startups to behemoths of industry, Chicago fosters corporate facility growth better than any other metro area in the U.S. We remain an international economic powerhouse, and I just don't think disparaging our state solves problems. I think progressing towards consensus is how you resolve issues now and build a better future here. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not all rainbows and unicorns, right? We have our share of problems to overcome. We need to do a better job of creating jobs. Like every state, we were hit hard by the economic downturn. You might be surprised to know, though, that according to a Pew Charitable Trust study, every state in the nation has fewer jobs now than it did in 2007. So across the country, states are struggling to improve employment trends for young and middle-aged workers. Given our abundance of resources and successes here in Illinois, it's imperative that we have better plans for job creation. But it's also important that we have a full, data-driven understanding of what our problem is. For example, we are often reminded of our lackluster unemployment rate, and while I would love to have that rate go down, it's not the sole indicator of economic performance or even our state's job climate. Economist and author Zachary Karabell recently wrote in the Wall Street Journal about the over-reliance and overuse of unemployment figures. According to Karabell, quote, focusing so single-mindedly on this one employment figure has made it impossible to have a cogent discussion of labor in the U.S. and to design meaningful responses to our varied economic problems. That sentiment was echoed in a recent Pew study. The group's Fiscal 50 States Trends and Analysis report concluded that, and I'm going to quote from Pew, while unemployment figures receive more media attention, the employment rate is a preferred index for many economists because it provides a sharper picture of changes in the labor market. By focusing on 25 to 54-year-olds, trends are less distorted by demographic effects such as older and younger workers' choices regarding retirement and full-time education. So such data, when applied here, show that while our unemployment rate is high, our employment rate ranks Illinois 20th in the nation, therefore better than the national average. And there is something to be said for the quality of jobs in Illinois. Illinois outpaces by far in the average salary paid almost 21% higher than our neighboring states' collective average. Those opportunities are why people continue to move to Illinois and start families here. Illinois continues to grow. Our population stands at an all-time high of nearly 12.9 million people. In the last decade, we added more than 411,000 people. That's akin to adding a city the size of Atlanta. And according to the Census Bureau, we've kept growing, adding more than 50,000 people in the last 3 years. Now, it's neither new nor a secret that many older Illinoisans migrate to warmer climates. But Indiana isn't warmer, and Illinoisans aren't flocking there. That was backed up by a recent Governing.com analysis In fact, that analysis suggests the opposite to be true. But what about our taxes, you might ask? Of the states that have personal income taxes, ours is one of the lowest. In addition, our tax system is quite different from most of our neighbors. Missouri, where I actually pay income taxes because my law firm is based there, has a progressive income tax system. So does Iowa. So does Wisconsin, even Kentucky. Yes, we border Kentucky. It has a progressive income tax. So I'm willing to wager that many people in this room would pay a higher rate in those states than you pay here. Indiana, like Illinois, has a flat income tax. Indiana's state tax rate is lower than Illinois', but Indiana lets mayors and county leaders impose local income taxes to help balance their budgets. So, for example, in Indianapolis, the combined income tax rate is 5.02%, actually higher, more than what you pay here now. Income tax rates in some Indiana counties top 6%. Getting back to my central point, clearly there is room to improve in Illinois, but what I want to see is our state utilizing the wealth of resources available here to combat joblessness as an intelligent, not knee-jerk manner. At this very moment, Illinois businesses are advertising more than 210,000 job openings online. 85% of them are full-time positions. We need programs to link people to those opportunities and ensure that our workforce has the skills employers desire. Now, Illinois currently ranks 45th in state-funded workers training and lags neighboring states' efforts. So we're working on a tax credit program that would allow employers who add jobs to utilize resources to cover job training costs. This would put more people to work and ensure employers have a trained workforce. A lesson we learned from the last recession is employers need greater flexibility to work with employees, to explore programs where, rather than losing a job during a downturn, a worker and employer could opt for reduced hours, and unemployment benefits could make up much of the difference. Such a policy would allow employees to remain employed, and employers wouldn't lose trained workers or have to train new people when the economy rebounds. I'm hoping that in the weeks ahead we can flesh out some ideas and win bipartisan support. I am optimistic that we'll be able to do that because we have proven time and again that we can work together in Springfield to make tough decisions to improve our economy. The decisions made over the last 5 years have brought us back from the brink of financial disaster and created momentum towards a better future. So I'd like to give you a few of those examples. In 2009, all 50 states combined to invest $39 billion in roads, bridges, schools, and other infrastructure. Illinois was $31 billion of that 39. Obviously more than all of the other states combined. Illinois Jobs Now projects have resulted in more than 439,000 jobs. Those projects are making it easier for businesses to move products and for employees to get to their jobs and to their home and for their families. At a time when business was fleeing to Las Vegas and Orlando, we took on the unions and revamped work rules and restored the convention industry's faith in McCormick Place. Those changes have kept conventions here and added new ones. We have brought others back, more jobs for the union workers at the convention halls. After much debate, we struck a bipartisan deal to change our workers' compensation laws because we recognized it had to be done to improve our business climate. As a result, recommended rates have dropped 13.3%. In 2011, we worked with business and labor to overhaul unemployment insurance. The new provisions are anticipated to save businesses $400 million over the next 8 years, the equivalent of a 14% tax cut. The new law makes it easier to go after fraud and to reduce cost and to protect honest employers. We recognized that the state's Medicaid program was going to swamp our budget. Republicans and Democrats worked together to rein in the growing cost through a series of reforms known as the SMART Act. By reducing eligibility, weeding out fraud, raising our cigarette tax, we reduced the strain on the state budget by $2.7 billion. Those savings are more than double what's projected for our historic pension reforms. The cuts to eligibility were so severe, by the way, that there are actually Republicans and Democrats who are introducing bills to roll back some of those savings. The past 5 years have seen more action on stabilizing our pension system than at any point in our state's history. It began back in 2009, a law that changed the pension system for new hires. And it accumulated, of course, accumulated this past year with this historic pension reform for current workers and retired workers that we advanced to the courts for judicial review. I should again note that all of these accomplishments have been done in a bipartisan fashion. There is, however, one area that unfortunately remains partisan, and that's been our state budget. So Democrats have had to act alone in balancing our financial plans, and you should know that our budgets paid down our bill backlog by billions. The backlog grew as high as $9.2 billion during the 2012 budget year after the terrible recession. By targeting savings and new revenues towards this debt, we've managed to pay down $3.6 billion in old bills to vendors. That's of little comfort if you're among those still owed the $5.6 billion. But as it stands today, we've cut this bill backlog by more than a third in 3 years. And by the way, most of these past due bills are less than 60 days old. So our budgets have made the full pension payments, even as those payments have soared to make up for generations of inaction and underfunding. State auditors recently noted that because the state is making those payments, the pension system have been able to stop selling off assets. That means that their portfolios are getting stronger and helping to bolster our recovery. And we have cut when necessary. Last year, the state headcount was down more than 5,000 employees from where it was 5 years earlier. The state has shuttered 14 state facilities to squeeze out savings. We annually rank as having one of the lowest ratios, if not the lowest ratio, of state employees to population in the country. We also finally put an end to the practice of balancing our budgets by intentionally taking a big chunk of our group health and Medicaid payments and pushing them off into the next fiscal year, just to make spending look even. The current budget ended that fuzzy math and instead matches a year's worth of funding to the real year-long cost of the programs in an effort to stop running up debts and getting control of our spending. The point I'm trying to make here is that we are doing what needs to be done. We've done it with a sense of responsibility that was previously lacking at the Capitol. Whenever possible, we reach across the aisle and do it together. When that's not possible, for whatever reason or motivation, we've shown that we aren't afraid to act. So to sum up, these accomplishments, combined with our long-standing advantages, inspire my confidence in an optimistic future for our state's economy. Negative rhetoric, too often espoused for nothing more than personal political gain, ignores the promise and the progress of our state and will not produce a better Illinois. The job of restoring confidence is more than changing the way we talk about our state. It will also include a debate on how we can fuel our economic recovery with policies that boost business while providing the best opportunities for workers. I'm looking forward to the bipartisan conversations on how to advance that goal. Thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you, and this morning I look forward to some answers to some of your questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, President. All right, I've got the microphone. Give me a little wave or something. I will come to you, then just stand, state your name, and then your brief question.
Hi, Sheila Weinberg, Truth in Accounting. Thank you for your comments this morning. The state constitution has a requirement, as it should, for the state to balance its budget, remain fiscally solvent. To me, that would mean that your revenues should equal your expenditures, and we're not going into debt. So how do we balance our budget and go into debt at the same time?
Well, if you look on your tables, I've passed out a couple of graphs, one of which is on one side, we show the economic indicators indicating what I referenced, the salary levels in Illinois compared to our other states. There's also a chart showing the personal income tax rates of the Midwestern states, including two rates for Illinois, the current rate of 5%, and then it shows you the rate that goes into effect January 1st, 2015. On the other side, you'll see that we have budget basics. There's a dollar bill which shows you our state budget. I've acknowledged that in the past we've increased our deficit by under-appropriating what we actually spent over a 12-month period. We've ended that. We've been paying down our bills. I've indicated over $3 billion in the last 3 years. We've also been paying off pension obligation bonds. In the 2 years that we had the worst drop in revenues in the history of the state, we didn't want to skip our pension payment. So we borrowed money, put it in the pension system. That's proven to be a wise move because the stock market has literally doubled since we did that. But we've had to make payments to those old debts, and we've been doing that, included in our budget, with one exception, that being the group health insurance, which has been an area that all the state employees, all the university employees, we have to pay for their health insurance. We've, in the past, fallen behind there. We have been appropriating as much as we've been spending. Now, we have a problem, however, for next year. That's also illustrated by this chart, which shows you that red arrow. So we have last year's budget, and we have some pressures in trying to determine what this next year's budget is going to be. The biggest challenge is the fact that the income tax rate goes from 5 down to 3.75. That's a 1.6, almost a $1.6 billion drop in revenue. And then we have some other increases, which are spelled out here, which are expected to go up. These are just in part because of the cost of these programs, which are set by statute. And as a result, there's formulas that drive these revenues. So for mayors, if there's any mayors in the room, there's the local government distributive fund. We share over $1 billion from our state income tax with local mayors. It's a formula. It will go up because there's been an increase in revenues. And so that money goes out the door. Any of these pressures that we have here, if we're going to alleviate them, we have to pass a law to change them. So I believe we've made great progress in catching up. Going forward, in this current fiscal year, it's going to be a real challenge, and I've laid those out here. So we've been getting better. I'm optimistic.
Diane McGuire, Naperville. Senator Cullerton, so pleased to see you include information on the taxes we pay here in Illinois. Paul Volcker, former Fed chief, has said that Illinois has too narrow a tax base, especially with regard to a sales tax on services. In Illinois, we tax only 17 services. The national average is 56, and in Iowa, they tax 94. Once again, we tax only 17 services. Will there be serious consideration given to addressing this important source of revenue for our state, helping to address our serious debt issues? Thank you.
I'm glad you raised that because it highlights the fact that when we compare our state to all the states that surround us, they tax services. So if you go and get your oil changed in Iowa, you pay sales tax on the oil as well as on the service that it's involved. As long as we have a bipartisan look at this, I'm obviously willing to do that. But I would suggest that it be revenue neutral initially, that we lower the tax rate of our sales tax. And if we want to expand it to services in a bipartisan way, so that there will be a net flat, initially a net flat taking in of revenue, so that in the future, perhaps as the service economy grows faster than the goods economy, we would be able to keep up with inflation. So I'm open to do that as long as we do it in a bipartisan way. And I think that my Republican counterparts are open to that.
Ann Dunlap from Chicago. Thank you very much, Senator, for the presentation, for your service. I've recently retired, and I'm shocked to find that neither my pension nor my Social Security is state taxed. I've already informed my state representative that I expect to be taxed, and I am informing you as well.
The Civic Federation recently proposed that we change that. It's good to highlight the fact, though, once again, we have another policy where other states, in fact, of the states that have an income tax, there's only 3 that don't tax retirement income. And we don't tax retirement income, as you pointed out. It puts $2 billion into the pockets of retirees. The flip side of that is the state loses $2 billion a year. So, but you can imagine it's very controversial. And once again, if we want to talk about that, we'd have to do that in a bipartisan fashion, as part, perhaps, of a kind of a grand bargain where we talk about the entire tax policies of the state. Then I think it would be something that would certainly come up. But again, we're not going to do this unless we do it in bipartisan fashion. Now, look, I know we have a supermajority in the Illinois state legislature. We actually have the largest Senate caucus in America, Republican or Democrat. But all these accomplishments that we've passed, pension reform is a good example, couldn't do it without Republican votes. So with the exception of the budget, tax policy is something we have to work on. With the exception of the budget, we've had bipartisan support in many of these things. The capital bill that I referred to in order to pass the capital bill, we had tax increases. Republicans joined in helping us to pass that so we can improve our infrastructure. We have to do it in a bipartisan way. But I'm open-minded to it only if there is that support.
Mr. President, let me take the privilege of asking a question. We've got the campaign going. It's about to get underway in earnest, and coming up between Governor Quinn and some Republican. How will that affect actual activity? How will that affect your output in Springfield this spring?
Well, it's very interesting timing. If you think about it, we're going to have this campaign for governor. The Republican nominee is going to want to be the governor starting next January, halfway through our fiscal year. We vote on our budget in May. The Republican candidate is going to be operating under the budget, if he wins, that we vote on. We have identified here, with this chart, the budget pressures. We believe we have close to a $3 billion hole we have to cut. I want the Republican nominee to come to Springfield and tell us how would he balance this budget, since he wants to be the governor for half of that fiscal year. Now, I'm not trying to be cute here. I think this is really important. We happen to have 2 state senators who get to vote on the budget, who are candidates. If one of those wins, they can actually introduce their own budget. So we need to have this dialogue. I don't want any secret plans. You know, just elect me and we'll tell you after the election how we're going to balance the budget. We should learn now what's their policies. If they say we want the income tax rate to go down to 3.75, we want that savings for our taxpayers, fine. Then just tell me where we're going to cut the $3 billion. It's very frustrating to me to hear these Republican debates. They just throw off, oh, we're going to cut Medicaid. I want to reiterate this. We cut Medicaid by the package was $2.7 billion. And so we've already done this. Bipartisan votes. Ask Dale Ryder. He was the state senator, Republican, who was at the table. We didn't leave any or a lot of money on the table when we cut Medicaid. So if they've got some secret plan, make it public and come to Springfield.
Good morning. My name is Nellie Vasquez-Rowland, president of A Safe Haven Foundation. As you know, President, we serve the homeless. And I was wondering what your thoughts are in terms of protecting social services. In our business at A Safe Haven, we provide a whole robust range of services that help the homeless go back to work and provide, we help them get permanent housing, and yet our budget has been cut over 50% over the last 6 years when we're experiencing skyrocketing demand. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are in terms of how we can empower people to get back into the workforce that have been really hit by the economy.
Well, I did talk a little bit about plans to try to match up the jobs that are available with the skills, Nellie. But your question gives me an opportunity to once again direct your attention to this budget basics. The green part of this dollar bill we call required spending. These are things which are driven by a formula. If you want to save money here, you got to change the law. You got to change the pension law, reduce pension payments. You got to change the Medicaid formula, reduce Medicaid payments. You got to change the local government distributive fund if you want to give less money to mayors. Mayor of Country Club Hills doesn't want me to do that. So those require changes to law. If you can't pass those changes, that money goes out the door. What's left at the bottom, education, higher education, and human services, that's the part that gets squeezed. So over the past decade, human service providers, which are not-for-profits like yours, I believe, which are not union, they provide fundamental services that we all agree have to be done. People with mental health issues, children with disabilities, these are not Republican or Democratic issues. And those basic services are being provided, and we're funding it. But if we don't have the money, we have to cut you. So that's why it's so important to have specific plans to balance this budget by finding the way to close this $3 billion hole. And that's going to be a challenge, but again, if we have bipartisan help for the first time since I've been the president, bipartisan help on the budget, it'll make it a lot easier for us to do that.
Janice Dale, member of the Public Affairs Committee. Currently there is this is a little off topic, there is a move underway to change the way legislative districts in Illinois are drawn, and I wondered if you had an opinion or a view on whether Illinois would benefit from having the legislative maps drawn by an independent commission as opposed to by legislative leaders.
Right. Well, obviously I'm not very objective on this because we just came through redistricting, but there are some statistics that you might find surprising. So we were accused of gerrymandering the congressional districts and the legislative districts. If you look at the 2010 election results, Mark Kirk won, Pat Quinn beat Bill Brady. And you take those election results, how Kirk did, how Brady did, and you superimpose those results on the current congressional map and on the current legislative districts. You'll see that, in my opinion, we did not gerrymander. The congressional districts, there's 18 of them. Mark Kirk won 12 of those 18, if you use the 2010 election results. Bill Brady won a majority of the Illinois Senate, 31 districts. So, and that was the last election results that we had when we drew those maps. So in 2012, when the Democrats did real well, of course the Republicans said, well, of course they gerrymandered the maps, that's why we lost. I think, personally, it really depends on the candidates in the year. So 2010 was a great year for the Republicans. 2012 was a great year for the Democrats. This year, we don't know. Obviously, we changed the law to have much more input in drawing these boundaries. It was an incredibly much better system than 10 years before that, when all of the incumbent senators, congressmen, except for one, got together and cut their own deal, drew their own maps. The reason why they didn't invite the 19th guy is because we lost a congressional district. So 18 of them got together, drew their own maps, and then said, here, vote for this. And they were terrible. These maps were, they looked like salamanders. So the point is, we've improved that process. And we obviously, where there was a lawsuit, 2 panels of Republican majority judges upheld it. So I just think that people should just look at those statistics and realize that you have another factor that you can't ignore. The Voting Rights Act and case law. It's very, very clear that even though you look at some of the districts and you say, well, how could you draw such an odd-shaped district? It's because it's driven by the fact that you have to draw maps to maximize, if you will, the opportunities for minorities to elect their own people. So, again, I'm not very objective, but those statistics I think are very telling.
Good morning, Jason Sachs from Chicago. My firm, we're a law firm that represents a large number of nursing homes in the state of Illinois and especially in the Chicagoland area. Over the last 10 years and more, our clients have seen a huge increase in the number of personal injury lawsuits filed against them. Though that's been good for our business, it's not good for our clients. The rising cost of the litigation has decreased the available insurance options available to the nursing homes and has substantially increased the cost of that insurance. Is the state legislature currently looking at this, and if so, what are the current proposals or actions being looked at?
You know, I was not aware of that specific area of tort reform as it affects nursing homes. I do know that in the case of workers' comp, as I indicated, we made some pretty major changes to try to bring the workers' comp insurance down. But I was not aware of specific lawsuits against nursing homes. There's been obviously general proposals for tort reform promoted by the business community. Usually there's opposition by the plaintiffs' lawyers who are also big players in the legislature. So, but we do have, we're the top state in the nation, which I didn't mention, but for insurance, that's why we have so many insurance companies that are based here. We have a lot of competition in insurance, and so it should be, that should result in us having competitively priced insurance policies. So I'd be more than happy to talk to you if you contact us with some specifics to look into it, because there might be some aberrations in the tort system as it relates to nursing homes, and I'd be happy to look at it.
Mr. President, first I have to thank you for reading the materials that I write.
And quoting them.
It's always encouraging. A couple of subjects that you have not yet touched on and I think are worthy. One, local pensions. Obviously, as a result of last year's state action, there's been an expectation that the General Assembly would come back and deal with local pensions, specifically being driven by Chicago's situation. And the other one is Senator Menard's activity about restructuring the way we allocate education funding in the state. Is that proposal, or even the thought process, getting traction among the General Assembly?
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
there's 2 issues. First of all, the pension bill that we passed is in court. And we're not going to be able to bank the savings that we expect to get from that bill until the court rules. It's about if it's found to be constitutional, it'll save us about $1.2 billion in the next fiscal year. If, however, the court throws it out, I am confident that there's a framework for a bill that we can pass that will be constitutional. And I don't have the numbers yet, but I would just maybe go out on a limb and predict that we can save as much as 80% of what we saved on the bill that we passed if the court throws that out. So I'm still optimistic about saving money on the pensions. That's the state pension system. Now, we have Chicago has 4 pension systems that are woefully underfunded. We've passed laws forcing them to make increased payments. And we are hoping and continue to hope that the city and the unions that represent those workers negotiate, come up with a deal. That has happened for the Water Reclamation District, and we codified that agreement. It has happened for the Park District, and we codified that agreement. Now, the city has the ability, as a home rule unit, to raise their property taxes without our permission. But, you know, you can only raise them so much, and you'll start to actually bring in less money because people will leave. So we need to have reform, and the mayor's been pretty clear on that. Now, with regard to the Chicago public schools, I've been very open about this. We have already passed a law affecting the suburban and downstate school teachers. And we would ask the Chicago school teachers to once again try to work out an agreement with the Board of Education. Unlike the city, the Board of Ed cannot raise their property taxes unilaterally. They have a cap. And the savings that we would expect to receive if we applied the same law that we have for downstaters to the city of Chicago would save about $250 million a year. Now, the teachers might say, well, raise the property taxes by $250 million. That's unacceptable. So there has to be negotiations. We would urge them to do that. So those are the two areas in terms of pensions. With regard to education funding, it's incredibly complicated, the school aid formula, and it's gotten more and more skewed. So Advance Illinois, a very reputable organization, is studying ways to kind of go back and take a second look at how we distribute this money to school districts throughout the state for elementary and secondary schools. And Senator Menard, who used to be on my chief of staff, he's a state senator from the Decatur area, has been working on this. We'll see what happens. There's been a task force. There's recommendations. And whatever we do would obviously be phased in. So I'm very open to that. There's one other point. For those of you who live in Chicago, like I do, we're being treated differently than folks outside Chicago as it relates to pensions. And that has to do with the fact that for some reason, the state is the employer for the employer contributions for suburban school teachers, suburban and downstate school teachers. So they negotiate a contract with the teachers, and they say, oh, the pension contribution, the employer pension contribution, we're going to send that bill to Springfield. But for Chicago, those of us who pay income tax and sales tax and property taxes in Chicago, we have to pay for all of the Chicago's employer contributions. So because of these past mistakes that we made in underfunding, we pay over $3 billion. In this chart, there's $3 billion that goes to pay for suburban and downstate school teachers' pensions. Chicago gets $10 million with an M. So that's an anomaly, and we've suggested to the suburban and downstate areas, you got to start paying a little bit of your employer's portion of the pensions. It's called a cost shift. It does not have to result in higher property taxes in the suburbs and downstate. It can be negotiated with the unions when they do their contracts. We would suggest this be phased in over a 12-year period. And so it's important. This makes good public policy. And again, our Republican colleagues have acknowledged this, but they say we got to change the school aid formula and correct that first. Well, fine. We want to do both.
Bob Reed with the Better Government Association and a member of the Public Affairs Committee. Illinois has roughly 7,000 individual units of government, more than many other states, perhaps more than all of the states. They range from townships to school districts, mosquito abatement. Do you think we have too many units of government? And if so, what can be done to shrink it, rationalize it, and get greater efficiency?
We absolutely have too many units of government, and those of us in Chicago have no problem with this. We have one school district. We don't have townships. So the problem is, and this is a bipartisan problem, believe me, when you introduce legislation, as I have, to consolidate townships, consolidate school districts, you just get incredible pushback. What would result, of course, is not in savings to the state, but in savings to the property taxpayers who have to pay for schools and the townships. Now, it's even more complicated with school districts. Townships, for the most part, have assets. So when you combine townships, you're combining units of government that have assets. School districts have debt. And so when you're combining school districts and saying one school district is going to now have more debt than they had before, that becomes even more complicated. And then there's just the, you know, there's some high school out there that has been there for 100 years and another high school that has been there for 120 years, and they're both half full and nobody wants to give up their high school. So it really is difficult. If you go back and look at the history of this legislation, Senator Biss, Senator Schoenberg, and Evanston has tried to do this, Senator Harmon. It's very difficult. So I'm open to any suggestions. I have sponsored those bills. I will vote for them. It's just that it's difficult to get the political will for the suburban and downstate areas to do that.
Thank you very much, President Cullerton.
Great. Thank you. I'm not a Republican. I'm not going to be voting in that primary, so I'll let the Republican primary voters decide how they want to deal with that and who they want to send to be the candidate against Senator Durbin, who I'll be supporting.
It is kind of a funny thing to do, though, isn't it?
Well, again, that's a different party than mine, so I let them decide what they want to do.
Are you hoping
how
he's
they want
the
to
candidate
campaign.
against your
I think
candidate?
Senator Durbin would probably be a very good candidate against Senator Oberweis or the other gentleman that's running.
You know, I've had to return to your remarks for just a minute. I had the opportunity to ask Mr. Rauner how he would balance the budget. He waved his hand and said he'd cut Medicaid.
Yeah. You really have to cross-examine all of the candidates for governor about Medicaid costs. Senator Ryder, Dale Ryder, sat at the table with Patty Bellock, who's a Republican, along with a couple of other Democrats, and we spent a year going over 64 changes to cut the equivalent of $2.6 billion in savings on Medicaid. I mean, these were major cuts. And guess who's against those cuts? Pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, doctors, and it's really tough to do. And we're very proud of it. As a result, we've saved all that money. So we didn't leave a lot of money on the table. If we did, tell us what they are. Have Mr. Rauner come to Springfield or the other candidates, whoever wins the primary, and tell us where they want us to cut some more. Because we've already made a very big dent in our Medicaid payment, our Medicaid cost.
Senator, you said you were emphasizing bipartisan agreement, but it doesn't look like you would get any bipartisan agreement. So that with the tax coming off, where are the Senate Democrats as far as how are you going to balance the budget when that income goes away?
We've not had a balanced, we have not had bipartisan votes on the budget in 5 years. But this is different this year because this is the governor's election. If the Republicans want to be in charge of the state next year, the budget we vote on is their budget. So we want them to help fashion that budget. And so we want them to come to Springfield and tell us how they want us to put together the budget. And
right now you own the Senate. What would the Senate Dems do?
We own the Senate because we have a supermajority, but this year the Republicans would have a governor who would be the governor during that budget year. And that's why we're asking them to come and help us. And when you're going to decide who to vote for, a Democrat or Republican, you've got to listen to what their proposals are. And they have to make sense. They have to add up. And you can't just say, oh, we'll cut Medicaid and then not have any specifics. And so we have identified close to a $3 billion hole in the budget that has to be made up. And we're looking forward to their suggestions, just as we're looking forward to the governor's suggestions when he gives his budget in a few weeks.
Talks a lot about governing by executive order, implying that you could bypass the Senate, your chamber altogether. What do you do to...
I think Mr. Rauner should review the Illinois Constitution as to what the powers are for the governor in terms of executive orders. I think they're somewhat limited, and he's probably not aware of that.
Have you spoken to him? When's the last time?
Who's that?
Mr. Rauner.
I've only met him once. I haven't talked to him in years.
This issue of the budget deficit.
How does Illinois get out of this mess? I mean, we're still dealing with the issue of pensions. What do we? I mean, you've cut as much as you.
Yeah, we dealt with the issue of pensions. The savings that we're going to reap from that bill is delayed until the court rules. We've cut Medicaid, as I've indicated, which has cut our expenses dramatically. And this past year, we've been continuing to pay down our old debt. We do have a new concern, though, because of this drop in the rate of the income tax. We lose $1.6 billion. We need, and we have other increased expenses from this past year. So we need to make up for that difference, and that's where we need bipartisan help. We can do it. We have done it. We just need input from the Republicans this year as well.
Is the graduated income tax a good idea or a bad idea?
The graduated income tax is something that would be require a 3/5 vote in the House and the Senate in order to put that on the ballot. And it's not necessarily a tax increase. It's just there's no tax rates that are attributed to that proposal. So we'll just have to wait and see if there's enough political will to even put it on the ballot. I think it would be very difficult. There are things you can do in your budget that make it more progressive by increasing your income tax credit or education tax credits or personal exemptions that make even a flat tax more progressive.
Aside from the difficulties of it. Is it a good idea or a bad idea?
Well, it was a trade-off in 1970 when the Republicans wanted to have a flat tax. Mayor Daley wanted to have a home rule, and that was a conservative Republican philosophy of having a flat rate, which we've had, and as I indicated, most of the states around us do not have that. So it'd be up to the 3/5 of the majority of the General Assembly to put it on the ballot, and then the public would have to vote on it. It's probably a very difficult thing to pass, so in the meantime we're dealing with passing a budget this year that has to be balanced.
I guess just one more. Your implication to the unions that they do need to reach an agreement with City Hall here in Chicago on the Chicago pensions, does that imply that the General Assembly is not going to address the issue this spring?
Well, we have to do something, because if we don't act in the case of the Chicago Public Schools, they'll be, since they can't raise their property taxes unilaterally, $250 million is the equivalent of something like laying off 3,600 teachers. So if nothing's done, there's going to be massive layoffs. So it's in their best interest to work with the Chicago Public School Board and come up with a compromise, and we will then codify it.
And if there's no deal?
Well, then we have to act. And
General Assembly will do something.
just as we had with the pension bill that we passed for the state. We did not have union support, and we had to act, and we moved.
On minimum wage, what do you think the chances are that there are the votes in both houses to send a bill to Pat Quinn?
I'm in favor of raising the minimum wage. The minimum wage should not be the equivalent of poverty, and I think that there's general support for that both in Republicans and Democrats. In fact, even one of Bruce Rauner's 3 positions on that issue is to raise the minimum wage. So I think it's important, but at the same time we want to work with the business community. We want to work with the restaurants, for example, the Restaurant Association, to see if we can answer some of those concerns about the training of young teenagers and people who get tips. So we're open to working with them, but I think it's inevitable that there's going to be an increase in minimum wage. We can work with them on the timing as to when it's implemented, how much it should be. We're very open to that, but I think we will find that there's a bipartisan support for raising the minimum wage.
Senator, how does it make sense to expand Medicaid? We just talked about all the cuts you made that were painful. Now with the Affordable Care Act, we're looking to add 500,000 people to Illinois' Medicaid rolls. What sense does that make?
We've expanded Medicaid because the federal government's paying for the entire bill.
Patty Belloc says there's going to be a number of people coming on the rolls with it. You're only going to get half the compensation, and then what are you going to do after 3 years when you have to pick up 10%?
In 3 years, when we pick up 10%, we can make that decision at that time. In fact, I think the way we passed the bill to expand Medicaid was to say that in 3 years we're not going to be included. So the point is, we have added and brought in billions of dollars to our state from the federal government. And a good number of states that have Republican governors have decided to do the same thing. It was a very wise choice, supported fully by our hospitals. It's one of the reasons why Cook County has had their balanced budget this year. We saved hundreds of millions of dollars for Cook County by signing up for those expansion of Medicaid for Cook County.
Senator, you said this was going to be a jobs-oriented presentation. So can you close the circle for me? What's the job strategy?
Well, the first thing we should do is recognize that we're not as bad as people have been saying. I pointed out that the unemployment figure is not the most accurate figure. We ranked in employment rates better than national average, 20th in the nation, according to the Pew study.
We still have 200,000 or 300,000 fewer jobs than we did in the year 2000.
Every state in the nation, I'm sure you heard that.
Texas, not Florida.
Oh no, Texas and Florida, North Dakota, according to the Pew Center, has fewer jobs than they had in 2007. So that's really important.
Texas has more than 1.2 million more jobs.
Not from 2007. I'll be happy to give you this statistic. Okay. This is really important. That's why I did this research. So the other thing that's important, that I hope you got from my remarks, is that we make more money in Illinois than other states that surround us. That's a very positive thing. Maybe if you're an employer, you don't want to have to pay so much, but it's a good thing to be making more money. That's why we have so many people coming to Chicago now in the Chicago area for jobs. Now, as I indicated, we have online, you can go look up 218,000 jobs at the Department of Employment Security. We have to match up those job skills with those jobs. That's where we can do a much better job in job training. That's why I proposed a jobs training credit for workforce training. The employers, when they create a new job, they'll be able to get reimbursed for the cost of that job training. I think that will be a very positive improvement to our workforce.
And again, if I could just close the circle here, Mr. Whitley, I interviewed a couple of months ago for a special that we did, and he said that when they did a study, they found that Illinois' decline began long before 2007, 2008. That when they go back to the year 2000, we have fewer jobs than we did in the year 2000. I'm not saying 2007.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because we had a big manufacturing economy here in Illinois.
We have 1.1 million manufacturing jobs in '91. We have 570,000 now.
Right. And as you know, there was a big shift of manufacturing jobs overseas. Now that's reversing itself, primarily because we're seeing that the energy costs have come down. Illinois has one of the lowest energy costs in the nation. We export energy to other cities. So that's starting to reverse itself, and that's why you see from this new grant that we got for nano manufacturing research, we're turning the tide on that. And so that's why I'm so optimistic about the state.
Could you expand a little bit on Bruce Reiner's belief that he has the executive orders to do what he wants to do?
I would just urge his research staff to look into the Illinois Constitution to see what powers the governor has for those directives.
Well, he thinks he's got the power that Mitch Daniels had in Indiana, not so?
I would urge him to do the research. I'm sure he's been doing research on the budget and on the powers of the governor, and he's had a staff, and I'm sure that he should relook at them. That's all.
When he does that research, or his staff does, what will they find?
He might be surprised.
In what way?
He just might be surprised. That's all I can tell you.
Would you talk a little bit about anti-violence programs, of those being cut? I know that there's been the issue with the one that Governor Quinn was wanted to send money to, and some of the controversy there.
Obviously, we're very concerned about the crime rate. We've made great progress. We've seen great progress in the city. The mayor's done a great job with the police superintendent in that regard. But we were obviously disappointed to see the details of that audit. And that's something which we're going to take a real close look at when we do our budget this year and decide how much money. We don't want to stop anti-violence programs. We want to make sure that the money is being spent wisely. So, okay, guys, thank you very much.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.